Well, hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us for this week's panel conversation. My name is Matt Fulton, and I'm the Vice President for National Engagement for a company called Polco. Today, we've got an excellent panel to share the perspectives about how do you maintain a sense of community in this socially distanced world that we all find ourselves in. We do these conversations really for the purpose of gathering perspectives from government leaders and then sharing them with other people who are kind of facing the same kind of situations. The idea is to share ideas and to learn from each other. And hopefully you'll be able to take away a new perspective, a new idea, something that you might be able to use in your communities. So let's get underway. Here's how the day is going to go. I'll do some quick introductions of the panelists, and then we will entertain 3 questions and hear from each of the panelists on each of the questions. And then we'll finish things up by seeing if there's any interchanges between the panelists on things that they've heard or want to follow up a little bit more or dig a little deeper. The session is going to take less than an hour. And so with that, let's just kind of jump into our introductions. I want to thank all of the panelists for being here and sharing your perspectives. Our first panelist is Jessica King, who is currently serving as the Interim Chief Communications Director for the City of Austin's Communication and Public Information Office. This department provides, the overall strategic marketing and communication services to all departments, most importantly being the community engagement area that we want to be exploring today. Jessica's been serving the public sector for 20 years, with more than 10 years working for the City of Austin in a variety of capacities in the City Manager's Office, Watershed Protection and Development Review Department, Austin Resource Recovery, and now in her current role. She's got a BA degree from Trinity University in San Antonio and her master's degree from the Lyndon B. Johnson School at the University of Texas. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us, and I would really love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Sure. Community engagement has been the core center North Star for me. My background largely is related to policy, and I love developing policy. I'm a bit of a policy wonk. So what I found was that the only way that policy really worked well was whenever we were able to engage the various players and stakeholders in development of that policy. So engagement was critical. And I really wanted to make sure that we brought everybody to the table from very diverse backgrounds and diverse opinions about the different work that we were doing. And that has just led into a career focused on communication beyond just the engagement aspect, to realizing that in order to get people to the table, you have to market to them, you have to reach out to them, understand everything. And so that's really the core of my being in terms of public service and being able to provide policy that really reflects the input from our community, who will then take that policy and make it actually go and make it effective and put it to work. So that's my quick background.
That's great. And, working in such a dynamic community like Austin, that engagement piece is such an important part. So thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts. Our second panelist today is a good friend of mine, Andy Pederson, who currently serves as the village manager for the village of Bayside, Wisconsin. It's just north of Milwaukee on the shores of Lake Michigan. Andy's been the village manager there since 2005. And Andy's also served as the president of the Wisconsin City County Management Association, as well as served as the vice president on the ICMA Executive Board. Andy also is involved as on the director for the Alliance for Innovation. He's actually the vice chair for that group. Andy's had a variety of different roles prior to coming to Bayside, and has just been absolutely engaged in so many different ways in serving the profession. With committees through ICMA and others. So Andy, thank you for being here, and would welcome you to share anything else that I missed.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. We're probably the other side of the extreme of Austin. We're a community of about a little under 4,500 residents. So we're rather small. Obviously, there's probably pros and cons with both ends of the spectrum as far as being large or small, but being small certainly has its advantages as far as being able to directly communicate with residents and having that one-on-one individual touch, where I think we're about 2.5 to 3 square miles. So we're pretty much a stone's throw from every resident in the community, and are able to adjust and hear those concerns. So community engagement is a key pillar of one of our strategic values as an organization and as a community. And, it certainly has been heightened during the pandemic, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later. But again, Matt, thanks for the invite and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, Andy. Thank you for being here. In a smaller community, engagement is just as important as one of those universal kind of rules. Smaller communities sometimes bring a whole different level of vibrancy. And I know you're in a great community, and so and doing a lot of cool stuff that I'm excited about hearing. Let me introduce Armando Fana, who's our third panelist. Armando is been working in government in a whole variety of different capacities for over 20 years. He's extensively worked around the topic of workforce development. And I was really particularly intrigued, Armando, with your experience with HUD for so many years, running the field office in Miami. And I mean, the talk about big responsibilities of your office being responsible for covering the 10 southernmost Florida counties. Armando is now working as the assistant administrator in the city of West Palm Beach, and has been there since 2015 as its director. Well, he started as the director of housing and community development, and then became the assistant city administrator for community services in 2019. Armando's got a BA degree in business management and an associate's degree in international business. He's also a veteran and served in the Coast Guard for 7 years. One of the other things, Armando, that I took from the information that you provided to me was how you have reached out into the community and gave of your talents in serving on the board of directors for ChildNet and the Florida Housing Coalition. So thank you for being here, and would love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Sure, and thank you, Matt. Appreciate the invitation. And yeah, as you noted, I've had some experience both at the federal level and local level, military. So I've gotten a little bit of taste of everything, as well as the private sector. I was a mortgage broker for a while and did some other things in the private sector. So, West Palm Beach is it's a dynamic, growing city. It's a mid-sized city of about 120,000. It's also the county seat, so it swells quite a bit during the day in terms of visitors that come into work. And as a lot of places in Florida, we're a high tourist destination. And we have become basically a magnet for a lot of folks who are relocating from the Northeast right now into Florida. And Palm Beach County, and specifically West Palm Beach, has been one of the real prime target areas for a lot of businesses and executives and individuals who want to move from the Northeast and get to warmer climates and I guess more open climates, we could say. With COVID, we've got a lot of folks who kind of flee COVID and come here and set up shop, and a lot of them are looking to set up shop permanently. So we're rapidly changing in terms of full-time citizens and residents and demographics. And it's an area that I grew up in. I grew up in West Palm Beach. I left when I joined the military, when I joined the Coast Guard when I was 19 years old, and just came back 5.5 years ago, joining the city of West Palm Beach. So a lot of ways it's full circle. I'm back home in the city I grew up in. So thank you again for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you, Armando. Really appreciate you being here and bringing your very broad and deep perspective. Well, here's the topic. The topic is maintaining a sense of community in a socially distanced world. And, I think we all have developed a strong appreciation for just how disruptive COVID and all of the other things that have been impacting our communities over the last couple of years, the impact that has had on just disrupting everyone's lives, not only from a municipal organization standpoint and a public service delivery standpoint, but just every person's life in your community. And so the question really then becomes, how do you keep the connection between residents and those things that are really important for maintaining vibrancy and connectedness with the decisions that are being made by local government organizations? And so we want to explore what you've been doing and what successes and what creative things that you could offer up to other organizations that you have found to be successful in your own communities. One way to maybe think about it is engagement has always been difficult. Before COVID, I always got frustrated as a city manager when you would have more staff people at a meeting than you would residents. And, there have been just so many different kinds of barriers that have played into your ability to be successful with engagement. But then you lay on top of that all of the dynamics of a pandemic and recognizing that you have all moved virtually and now are probably in a hybrid kind of situation. All of the changes that you've had to adapt to, all of the different ways you had to support your city councils and their roles. All of those traditional engagement things have just been complicated by the pandemic. People are working from home, homeschooling their kids while they're maintaining their jobs. It's just been really, really a big challenge. And so the idea today is to get your perspectives on how are you dealing with this issue and what successes are you finding in the work that you're doing. So we're going to be asking 3 questions of you. The first question is, how has your communication and engagement strategy evolved since the beginning of the pandemic? The second is, how does resident engagement influence your success in maintaining a sense of community? And then finally, what tools are you using to measure feedback from your residents during all of these challenging times? And so what I'd like to do, Jessica, is start with you with the first question. Jessica, can you talk a little bit about how Austin's communication and engagement strategy has evolved over the past year or so?
Sure. And COVID actually was the trigger for that. In Austin, we have a very diverse community. We have definitely an Eastern break where there is an Eastern side and a Western side. Oftentimes, we call it the Eastern Crescent, which is made up largely of we have a large population of Hispanic individuals as well as African American. There's one section of the community that in the northwestern side or northeastern side of Austin that is a multitude, like it is probably our little New York version of many, many, many different backgrounds. And so outreach, because our community is so engaged in what we do or very interested in what we do, can be very challenging. We have a large immigrant population as well. So from engagement, from that basis, when we try to engage the public, we have largely in the past relied on in-person interactions, meeting in person at their location or near in a community center close to them. And when COVID hit, just keep in mind that for Austin, it happened in mid-February, which is when we start to announce South by Southwest. And South by Southwest is a huge international event for us. Austin is a huge event community. And so it brings in tons of people that allows us to also engage even further while our own residents are out interacting in all the events. And that was the first trigger where we had to shut everything down and shift pretty quickly. We also have a huge digital divide, so we couldn't rely solely on digital inclusion or having digital meetings. And we literally are still, we adapted very quickly to using virtual engagement. So Zoom was one of the platforms. We have Teams. Our goal was to try to still engage where people were. And the best way for us to do that was to use ambassadors and to really rely on people who had social interaction opportunities. Social media became the platforms we started to lean on. We started exploring more use of Twitter and Facebook and holding virtual engagement online through Facebook Lives and Facebook events. We did more tweet-alongs. We did a lot more engagement through Zoom, also just on smaller personal communications with meetings and interacting externally with the public. So we had to shift completely to a digital framework in many ways because we relied so heavily on in-person interactions. And that has been challenging, and we still struggle in large part with the digital divide. So we lean on ambassadors, people who are trusted in the community to share what we're doing and how we're working and inviting people to the conversation. Were it not for those ambassadors, we wouldn't be able to get information out to the public. You only have so many people on on a Twitter network or Facebook network. And so we need those individuals to be our ambassadors and push more information out and get people to the room to converse with us.
Jessica, who were the ambassadors?
Oh, so many. So one of the, I don't have names in front of me, but you could probably look back at some of our COVID videos, and probably like many communities, a lot of people didn't really trust that COVID was an issue. And so the first barrier was gaining trust from the community, and we would reach out to people that we saw who had large followers, a large following base on Twitter or Facebook, and they had their own communities. A lot of musicians, because Austin is a very music-centric community. We could look to our musicians, we could look to our artists, we could look to community leaders, and those who were nonprofit organization leaders. They were out in the public and out on the ground. And we pulled them in and asked them, would you make a video with us to help people understand what's going on with COVID and what they can do to help protect themselves and their families? So it was anybody who had a large following and who had the trust of the community.
I love that idea about pulling in those community partners and community recognized and respected folks. That's a great idea. Yeah, Thank you. Andy, could you share how Bayside's communication and engagement strategy adapted to the environment over the past year?
Sure. Yeah, I guess this part of my theme probably will be our size and, the ability to connect with people. What we found was that it was probably more vital for us than ever, just because residents were not connecting with each other. They weren't out. They may be out on walks, but they were staying, obviously far enough away from each other that they probably weren't having a conversation. So I think there was greater reliance on, us communicating things, and we were, listening very intently, either directly or indirectly, to what people were asking and the types of information they wanted. I think in the early stages of the pandemic, there was a lot of focus on COVID communications. And after a little while, we backed off on that because there was so much resource. We wanted to provide the pertinent information, but we really tried to jump out in front and tell people what community resources there were. Our residents overwhelmingly, I don't know an exact percentage, but the overwhelming majority were working from home. So everybody had a very close view of everything that transpired in front of their home or out their picture window. And so there was a lot of engagement from that perspective. We did close the office for a while, but I think everybody came into work. We were just close. We really had to transition our operations to operate in a more virtual sense, but then also I think we utilize Zoom obviously for public meetings and such. I think it really was effective and maybe has a long-term impact with a lot of our subcommittees. We had more attendance, better participation, particularly like with an architecture review committee, which is more of a neighbor committee. If a project's going on at someone's home, it's easier for people to tune into those meetings. And so I think we had great success with that. We also really tried to work to make sure all of our communication channels were producing similar information and we were getting it out there in many fashions, so that we were sort of use the term, maybe not be the best term, but cross-pollinate the information between Facebook, Twitter. We develop a weekly email newsletter to the community. We've been doing it for about 15 years called the Bayside Buzz. And I know you'll talk about metrics later, but we saw our open rates and our readership and our click rates just go through the roof. So we knew we were having an impact. So we were trying to take whatever we heard, really working with our departments, asking them the questions, what are you hearing? And then trying to communicate that out proactively. One of the other things we did too, obviously with last year being so heavily focused on elections, is we went back to good old fashioned mailing in one particular case. I think it was the April election, because there was a lot of confusion at the state level in Wisconsin. There was a court case probably every other day that was issuing conflicting rulings. And so we ultimately, sent, in addition to all of our other communications, just sent a notice out to everybody. Here's, if you want to request an absentee ballot, fill this out and return it to us so we can get it. And I think Bayside was either number 1 or 2 in the state as far as the voter turnout in the April election. And I think we attribute a lot to that. So we wanted to try to make it easy and bring the service to the people. Like I mentioned, we really transitioned a lot of our operations to more of that virtual setting. We were still here. We utilized the technology. So, we have Office 365 and phone systems that you can take anywhere. So we really tried to be responsive to people, knowing that they were home, they wanted concerns. We really emphasized to our staff to be as responsive as possible so that those questions didn't linger and we could proactively communicate. We also got, simplistic as putting frequently asked questions and did you knows in our weekly newsletters. What are we hearing? What are the questions are being asked? Because if one person is asking it, we probably have 10 people thinking it, and we were doing that on social media as well. And then I think one of the other things we developed is in our social media campaign, we developed theme-based days. So we have a program with our police department called My Blue, which is a personalized policing service based on quadrants. We have My Blue Monday, Trash Talk Tuesday. A lot of problem, obviously, with everybody being home. You got a lot more garbage and a lot more recycling, a lot more contamination. So you're trying to deal with that at the same time. So you're trying to educate people as well on things that maybe they hadn't really need to be educated on before because they're at work most of the time. Now with them being home, they see everything and we hear everything, as a result. So, we really had to adjust and adapt and really be flexible. And I think that was, one of probably the biggest way our communication strategy has evolved. And I think we probably, even though I think we communicate a lot, we communicated more than ever because we had a captive audience where people would truly read the emails we were sending them because they had more time to take a look at those things.
Andy, I think your experience is really supporting all of our research too, that we know that there's been a higher level of participation in the virtual world. It's just that more people it's easier to connect and people are looking to local governments, the trust level in local government and in terms of how they've handled or how local governments handled the pandemic. Residents have looked to local government for that support and the trust levels have gone up. It's just so I think in Bayside, you're really emphasizing that. I do love the theme-based days though. That's a great idea. And it brings a little bit of fun into what is really a disruptive and unsettling kind of environment. So
Yeah. One that's been really popular that I didn't mention is we sort of have Scam Saturday, with all the different scams that are out there with, COVID, the vaccine, all of that, I was trying to keep up. So we put out, sort of almost like the scam of the week to try to educate people. And yeah, that's just one of our themes is Scam Saturday. So for what it's worth.
that's a great idea. Armando, how has West Palm Beach's communication and engagement strategies and approach changed over the last year?
Sure. Well, it's interesting because just pre-COVID, we were really looking into how to make our community engagement process a lot more robust and have the ability to reach a wider audience. As Matt, as you said, there's so many, in the past, you look at so many community engagement efforts that cities do, and there's more staff people, as you said, than there are participants. And so we were really looking at how we can do some of these hybrid versions of community engagement pre-COVID. And what COVID did was just accelerate that process and force us into figuring it out. And so what we found was, as you mentioned, is participation levels increased quite a bit. And we're lucky here in Florida to have sunny weather, warm weather throughout the year. And so we were able to really utilize our outdoor spaces a lot more effectively than maybe other cities. And we had also the political realities that we just didn't have a lot of restrictions in Florida when it came to pandemic. So there's a lot more comfort level, I think, with the general public here to even going on site. So we did a lot of hybrid community engagement efforts. Our city hall never really closed down. We had some folks who were teleworking, but we've maintained pretty much the staffing levels at City Hall that we had pre-COVID for the most part, with some staggered scheduling. So we continued to have, particularly once we got into the summer months, on-site neighborhood meetings with social distancing and in an outdoor environment, and then combine that with a virtual meeting. So we bought the equipment that we needed to buy in order to be able to basically have the ability to both do the on-site and the virtual at the same time. So we had, as an example, a significant property that the city owns that we wanted to put out for invitation to negotiate, and we need to get input from the community on it. And so we did a combination of an on-site and virtual meeting in one of our public spaces, spread everybody out who came to the meeting. We had about 25 participants. We had enough room to spread them out and socially distance. And then we had cameras set up and laptops so that folks could view the meeting virtually and also participate and ask questions online. And that went really well. We got great feedback on it. We did even online polling at that meeting, and both folks who were virtual and in person were able to participate in that polling, and got great feedback, great participation. I think we had between online and in person, we had, I want to say about 100 people participate, which exceeded almost any other public meeting we've had in the past on a topic like this. And so we had other examples after that we also used the combination of virtual and in person, and it's gone really well. And I think that'll be a standard we move forward with. And then also our city commission meetings. In the past, you had the same folks that show up for the meetings and give their comments, and not a whole lot of participation from folks outside of a handful of people who show up to meetings. And when we went to a virtual environment for our city commission and then to a hybrid environment, we've gotten a lot more participation from folks participating virtually or emailing us. Now they feel a lot more comfortable emailing comments into the city, and we read those out in public comment period. And so we've just been able to engage a lot wider of an audience than we did in the past. And I think it's just a lesson learned, and we'll be tweaking that moving forward and be able to use it post-COVID.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you brought up or mentioned, Armando, is how the pandemic kind of forced you to move forward on things that you knew you were going to get to. It just made you do it like overnight. And are you anticipating that a lot, the way that you're streaming your meetings now are going to be sustained going forward?
Yes, yeah, I think a lot of what we've been doing will be sustained, and there might be a little more tweaking with the new technology wise, but it's worked well. And actually, we just started recently. It went on last 3 months ago. We began to do in-person streaming. I mean, in-person meetings again, but folks can still participate virtually if they want to.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Andy, can you talk about how you think engagement influences how successful Bayside is in maintaining its sense of community? Oops, I'm sorry, Andy, you're on mute.
Yep. Yeah, sorry about that. Sure. It's a great question. We are, I guess a little bit of our background is, like I said, we're a smaller community. We're up on the North Shore of Milwaukee County. There's actually 7 communities so that we sort of refer to as the North Shore. And, honestly, they're small, they're close knit. We provide a lot of services together. So really trying to establish that sense of community identity is really important. And I think, as I mentioned before, one of those pillars is, community engagement. Because a lot of times, I often say, if you took down the signs to the communities, you may not notice, the difference between one community and another as you transition between communities. And so I think, keeping, people informed, keeping people engaged, keeping people active, we've had an interesting effect. It's hard to quantify, but as we've rolled out more of our communications over time and been more proactive, I don't want to say we've seen less engagement, but we've seen a much more well-informed community. And so, I always try to talk to our staff about the fact that if we can provide those answers and that information proactively, people aren't going to call us. It's going to reduce the number of phone calls and they can move on. We understand people are extremely busy in their lives, and it may be the last thing they want to do or have the inability to call Village Hall or connect with us. I think, the pandemic has forced us to look a little bit differently. I think, as Armando mentioned, it expedited a lot of the changes that we were thinking about making, which I think has been a positive for us. And, it just really builds that stronger community. One of the things I hear, because we have a pretty strong distribution list for our electronic newsletter, and a lot of colleagues and peers outside of the communities will often say, I feel like I know more about, Bayside than I do about my own community. And we really try to pride ourselves on that to help, communicate those messages out so that there's that feeling of connection, even though it may not be absolutely personal. The information is there for them. And then, really with sending that out on a weekly basis, it's as easy as clicking reply to having that conversation. I think one of the things the pandemic has also allowed us to do is, have those one-on-one Zoom meetings more or less at different hours of the day. It's quick to do that, and maybe has opened up some opportunity. I know we just met with some residents a couple nights ago on some speeding concerns, and frankly, a year and a half ago, I would have never thought to having 4 of us on a Zoom call talking about the speeding problem, but we're able to do that. So I think we're able to respond actually quicker by doing some of that. And I think people just feel very valued. I think if I take that example out there, we got 5 minutes into the conversation and the comment was made by the resident, well, I'm not really sure we even expected you to respond, let alone set up a meeting and then do something about it. We don't really have suggestions. You're the experts. Can you just help us fix the problem? And I thought that was very telling. And I think it goes back to maybe some of your earlier comments, Matt, about just the levels of trust, the civility in government. Because I think not only did we have the pandemic, but we had everything, all the events of last year and sort of the political climates that we live in and how that trickles down to the local level, I think is it probably been one of our biggest impacts, is just general civility. And I think as we engage people, it helps to neutralize that lack of civility on other levels and brings a little bit more civility to our community.
Yeah, that is so great. I mean, one thing you said earlier, Andy, which dovetails into your comments now, is how intentional and how kind of, I'd say, disciplined you are in getting consistent messages on a regular basis out to your residents so that they have that connection and they're paying more attention to it. So that is kind of resulting in feeling a closer sense of being connected to the community, just because you're staying on top of things and you're helping people. You're making it easy for people to stay informed. And I think it's great.
Yeah, one of the other things we've really done is, we try to ask our staff, what's bothering you as a resident in the community you live in? Because if it's bothering you, it's bothering our residents too, most likely. And so we've really tried to push that envelope and make it more personal, because we know, at least we read, the pandemic is impacting everybody universally, maybe in a little bit different ways, but it's not impacting Bayside probably any differently than, in Austin. The only thing I would probably counter Armando is that a lot of our residents are probably going down to West Palm Beach for the winter. So we're sending them down your way, given it was a very long, cold, snowy winter.
That's great. Armando, you're gonna have to respond to that. Armando, can you talk about how engagement plays into West Palm Beach's sense of community?
Absolutely. And as with Austin and Jessica mentioned, how they're a big event communities. We are as well, but we cater more to a local community. We don't have a lot of large events that attract visitors from around the country or internationally, but we do have a lot of events that attract people from throughout the immediate region. And so one of the things that we had to do was get really creative. We are just seen as the event center for Palm Beach County. Get really creative of how we can create that sense of community in the environment that we were in with COVID. And so as an example, we launched in a few of our parks a drive-in movie concept. So we had drive-in movies, and each car had their little space. Jessica mentioned the concerts. We opened those back up with also pods that folks could come in and participate in the pods. And we got such great feedback for individuals and families saying that, wow, it made us again feel like we can be with our community. We can be part of the community and be at these events and see our friends even from a distance. And folks really appreciated that. And then even our 4th of July, we actually did a concept. We have a big 4th of July celebration every year on our waterfront. We couldn't do that last year. And instead what we did was we launched fireworks from 2 undisclosed locations, but we told the community, we gave them kind of a hint of the general area where they would be. And we told them to go outside in their family barbecue, look up in the skies at 9 o'clock at night. And then at the same time, one of our local TV stations broadcast the fireworks live and had kind of a little segment about West Palm Beach's history. So all that kind of created all these events, and our library did a ton of stuff too virtually. They all tried to create that sense of community that we had somewhat lost touch with during the pandemic. And we did what we could both virtually and in person to keep that tied together and still maintain safe. So our community events really played a huge role in that.
I think that's great. I love the idea of an anonymous authorized fireworks ceremony or celebration.
Yeah, we got a lot of feedback on that, and we got a lot of feedback from you, but I think some national press on it. So
Yeah, no, it's a great idea. That's super. And all along the way, I wonder how many Bayside residents were there at the time.
yeah.
Yeah, well, at least probably 25%, I would say, of our population.
Jessica, can you talk about how engagement influences Austin's success and sense of community?
Sure. I really liked what both Andy and Armando said, certainly about the connection. And residents, I think, often see city employees as just city employees. They don't realize we live here too, and we are part of the citizenry. And so, two things I want to touch on. First and foremost, that when we engage in an in-person space, you leave your home at home, you leave your kids at home, and you go and you do an engagement in person. But when you're in a virtual environment and you have meetings late at night and the kids walk in, you can't help but look more human. And so when residents see that, oh, they have 3 kids tackling them and just attacking them during a meeting, it really personalizes the experience more. And there's a lot more grace, I think, oftentimes when residents can actually see through virtual engagement in particular, that you're human too, and you're trying to help solve a situation. So I think that's been a huge benefit from the virtual engagement aspect, that you've got that experience. And, when I did engagement way back in the day, way back in the day, and my kid would come, it definitely did humanize me more to those citizens. And so I just didn't see such a stark difference until we saw it in the virtual world, and everybody's video showed children bugging them, or the dogs barking, or the cat just deciding to cross the tail past the screen. So those are opportunities certainly to connect more personally and build a stronger community, even in a virtual environment. Events are still critical for us. And so the one thing that I look back on with this COVID environment was we have an annual event called the Zilker Tree Lighting and our Trail of Lights. And it has been a huge event that we have never, I think we've probably only had one situation where we've canceled it due to lack of funds during a recession. Otherwise, it's been in place for more than 25, 26 years. And so that is our go-to event. And we did a virtual tree lighting event, and we're able to coordinate with the media to broadcast it. And my favorite part, which is everybody's favorite part, are when the kids come together and sing. And so we reached out to the schools to bring some children in to video them separately. And then we strung the video together and showed that online. And then we Facebook Lived it. We did all the things to connect to the community on that. And it really brought back this sense of unity in the city, that even though we're separate, we can still have these celebrations that are traditions for us and that still bring Austin together. So these are the areas for community engagement that are just beyond the policy side, but really give that connection that I feel virtual world sometimes feels you can't do, but it really does offer space for you to be able to feel more like a human and more part of your own community. So those are the fun things that we've been able to accomplish.
You think about Austin, I think many people would, Austin just kind of carries a reputation of having a sense of community. And I think because of the things that you're bringing, all of the events and the vibrancy that you really promote and support. And so totally hear that. And I agree 100% with your comment on the humanization of city employees, just based on the reality of what we're in. And it has such a big impact on just the way people perceive your role and your responsibilities as a city employee, because you're dealing with the same issues that residents are, or the people are personally experiencing.
Absolutely. And my favorite part too, just as one, I never realized how much fur children, dogs, cats, any other type of animal can actually lighten the conversation in so many ways, right? So if you're in a tense conversation, we had a cat just walk past and kind of stick their butt in the screen. And I hate to say it, that employee was incredibly embarrassed, but it softened the tone. It made people calm down just a bit and come back to the conversation, have a little bit of a laugh and reset. And those are such good opportunities. I'm not saying throw a cat or a dog into all your meetings, but it might help every now and again.
Yeah, great.
I'll have to remember the term fur children. I hadn't heard that.
Fur children. Everybody has children. Some might be furrier than others.
Hey, Armando, can you talk about the tools that West Palm Beach is using for getting resident feedback on your overall community performance?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in terms of engagement, definitely polls, which is something we had not really used in the past until I talked to you, Matt. So we have used polls several times now, particularly post-COVID, as we've gone out, both in person and virtual. And then as we've gone out into the community, we've also recorded the feedback, both video-wise and also digitally on different platforms. And then one thing we did, and I mentioned the feedback we got on a property that we were putting out for bid. In that particular instance, we created all the communication that we had done on that particular project, both virtually and in person. We created basically a small booklet that was given to our city commissioners so that they had in front of them when it came time to make a decision on the property, all the engagement that had occurred, what the poll results were on the polls that we did, and they were able to make an informed decision and understand the engagement that took place and have it all captured in one document. So we've been much more intentional on how we capture feedback from our residents, and we're still moving and tweaking that as we go forward, but we're much more intentional on it and much more intentional about how we communicate that back to our political leadership and also to our residents as well, so they can see they have a clear understanding of what their peers and what other citizens are providing feedback, and they can see that their opinions are either shared or not shared, and understand the larger picture. And that's changed a lot, I think, post COVID, because we were doing a lot more of this electronic polling and a lot more of the virtual stuff, which sometimes is easier to capture anyway than in person.
Armando, did you you had mentioned earlier that you did some online polling at a meeting. Were you using our new tool called Focal Live?
We did. We used that once, and we used also we've used a couple different products. And our CRA, which is a separate entity, has also used some online polling. So yeah, both were able to do it on their cell phones. They could do it on their laptops, and it worked really well in all the cases.
Glad to hear it. Yeah, thank you. Jessica, what tools are you using in Austin for gathering resident feedback on things that you're doing in the community?
So probably our primary tool to gather feedback is we have a website called Speak Up Austin, and we have primary projects that are listed there, and normally a survey mechanism, survey questions that ask residents what their questions are. We do it in multiple languages, and we also coordinate with our 311 so that we can, if you have a language that's not posted on the site, you can call 311 and get the same questions translated and interpreted. So we really try to, again, reach out to a broad array of individuals in our audience. But we also use polls. I love the live polls that we can do, especially during our budget discussions. When you do the live poll, my favorite part is when people are like, no, I don't want to talk about that. And they can actually pick the different topic areas that we focus on. And that helps us tailor the conversation to them as well. So each audience can be different as they poll for each meeting. We do surveys as well. So we've done formal surveys where we hire a contractor who will call and do a very scientific survey, but we also do a lot of informal surveys based on feedback that we've gotten that people don't want the call. So they'll do online surveys. I was very interested because we received some feedback when we did the surveys recently. When we go back to the issue of trust, the feedback that we'd received previously was that citizens don't trust us. This particular segment of the audience doesn't trust us and doesn't trust the city with information. But when we surveyed and polled them, it turns out they did, and that the vast majority of the information they received was through the city, and that they trusted the city's information. So that was really helpful. And then our most recent investment has been in a social media monitoring tool, which is, we use ZenCity, and there are multiple out there, but ZenCity has been working for us. And it has actually adjusted our strategy too. And so what it does is provide assessments of insights that they're seeing across the board on social media, what's driving the communication out in the public and how people are responding. And so we look at those pretty much daily to see, okay, how do we have to adjust our communication to the public and what we're saying and what we're doing? And that has been incredibly helpful, especially as we're dealing with not just COVID, but we are in the midst of reimagining public safety as well. And so monitoring all the conversations around that has been incredibly helpful. But those are the big things that we do. And I love the idea of more polling, especially live. So, and I think we've used Polka as well for those.
Yeah, that's very cool. Do you, in your the community strategic plans, do you have resident perspectives in your metrics in terms of your overall performance for tracking purposes?
I can't say that applies across the board. No, because we're really decentralized. We have 15,000 employees in the organization and 50 some odd departments. And so each department kind of manages its own communications efforts. But when we're looking at a large city initiative like reimagining public safety, yes, we do look at the citizens' perspectives and how that's being tracked and whether or not we're adjusting to that. Homelessness is also a big driver. And so we are looking at measures around homelessness and public perception around that as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Andy, what tools are you using in Bayside for measuring resident feedback?
Yeah. Probably broken record theme, but obviously one is the personalization and talking to our staff. What are you hearing? What are the thoughts? One of the biggest things we utilize through our electronic newsletter, we use Constant Contact, is just the open rate, the click rate. They've developed some heat maps as far as, what is of interest to people. We tie a lot of that into our, what's called our Access Bayside, is our citizen request portal to filter, requests, complaints, suggestions, kudos if there are any, things like that. And we've tracked that much more closely. We usually did it on a quarterly or even annual basis, but we got down almost to the granular on weekly. And we saw increases in open rates of and we had extremely high open rates, probably 3 times the industry average in government to begin with, increases of nearly 10 to 20% at times. We also really tried to cater the messaging. So we were tracking it that way. And then obviously we were looking at our social media analytics as well, and tracking that. We actually developed monthly reports and sort of a community impact scorecard to look at, number of digital interactions, measure that based on, past years, past quarters, things like that. We have done community surveying in the past. We were supposed to do one. We held off just because during the pandemic, we thought the information may not be as valuable. We are going to be going through a comprehensive planning process now, so we'll re-engage in that. And then, we run a regional dispatch center as well. And so, again, that's usually a good source of information of what people are feeling, because during the pandemic, the joint or the consolidated dispatch center almost becomes a 311 center as well, for people just to call. And, it's supposed to be for 911, but it becomes 311. So, and then honestly, it's just good old fashioned context. When you're a small community, people have no problem reaching out to any of the staff or the manager. And so, you can judge engagement that way as well. Matt, I'm sure you're familiar with that. All of us, I'm sure, have been familiar with that as far as just good old fashioned commentary from the public. And you can sort of measure, sort of the sentiment of people. I've also tried to engage our board more to say, hey, what are you hearing? Are there any concerns, any themes, any trends that you're hearing as well? It's a little bit more anecdotal, so those are a little bit harder to quantify. But if we can get down to that granular level, I think we've probably addressed, we're certainly looking at the macro, but we're dealing a lot more with the micro. Because of that, I think Jessica brought up a great term about, I sort of wrote down sort of the humanization of COVID, of trying to develop a personality in our communications and our engagement strategy as well. Looking at what's worked, I think we've got some very historic gates, Lions gates in the village. We call them, they're rock walls that were built from rocks out of Lake Michigan. And when the Bernie Sanders meme went through, we put Bernie up, at the gates, and it was probably one of the most, widespread things we did, and just something simple. So I think COVID has really allowed us to do things that maybe we wouldn't thought of doing in the past, or transition. It's given us a little more ability to risk and innovate, and so we've been able to do that and then measure that as well to see if that worked. And in fact, it's been successful.
That's great, Andy. That's just super. You do a lot of really creative things in Bayside to pull people together and keep them connected to the community. So congratulations on that. Well, thank you all of you for those perspectives. These have just been great. I do want to just open up an opportunity before we lose Armando. If there's any questions or things that you want to share between each other, anything come to mind? Go ahead, Jessica.
So we are starting to explore meeting again in person, and the idea of hybrid is, we've always wanted to have a hybrid, then we pulled away, it was all digital and virtual, and now it's how do we accommodate a hybrid environment, especially given the level of staffing that we have too. And so I feel like once we get to a normal post-COVID world, we'll have meetings in person as well as a virtual requirement too. So Armando had mentioned this hybrid approach. How are you handling the staffing around that? Is it, are you seeing a need for more investment? Is it more challenging to have in-person and virtual, or are you doing those separately?
Yeah, there's two different, so I'll give you an example, like the community meetings that we've had. Really, the investment was about $300 in terms of a camera, mic, and then we just hook it up to the laptop. We'd have our IT department just kind of help us hook it up and have one person or two people who would monitor incoming questions or comments that would come from the public. We did it on Facebook Live once, actually. And so really just, it wasn't huge in terms of staff resources. It was just, like I said, $300 investment, one or two staff people to monitor the questions coming in. You're normally going to have a couple people at a community meeting anyway. So it's just, instead of them sitting around waiting for questions, they would be there monitoring them online. So maybe an additional staff person that you would need in a community meeting. And then in terms of our city commission meetings, we were already televising them as most communities do. So the only additional thing was to have those same people who were doing the video feed would also look and monitor, as did our one other staff person, monitor any feedback that would come in through email or electronically. So in general, I would say it's one additional staff person that you would need in order to monitor questions and comments, maybe two at the most. And then the minimal investment on video and audio, that stuff's become so cheap these days that it's not a huge investment like it would have been 10 years ago.
Thanks, Armando, and thanks for the question, Jessica. Armando, I know we're going to lose you, so let's just kind of wrap things up here just a little bit. I think this has been great. You have all brought up kind of things that maybe people don't think about as much as they should in terms of maintaining a sense of community. I mean, I think all of the community celebrations and kind of the creativity that you brought to humanizing the way that city employees work, as well as just all of the adaptations that you have all taken advantage of. I love the ambassador approach and the benefit and the value of bringing in community partners and those trusted people who can get to a broader network than you might be able to do just on your own. And the theme-based days, Andy, I think is just a great way to help create a positive personality to the community, particularly when people are so unsettled. Armando and Jessica and Andy, for that matter, just the way that you have used your community celebrations to help pull people together. I mean, all of the comments that you presented today have just really helped to emphasize what we are really trying to accomplish, and that is to get good ideas for people to benefit from. So thank you for that, all the work that you're doing on your community, in your communities, and for the messages that other people are going to benefit from. I'm going to follow up this session with an email, and I'll connect with you as well, just to get a little bit of a debrief on how the session went, things that you liked, things that you didn't like, I'll certainly get you the information for each other so that you can connect with each other on anything you want to follow up on. You know, we do these things every week. And so if you know of anybody that might have some interest and would be good at providing their perspectives, I would welcome you to get them in connection with me so that we can get them scheduled to participate in the panel. These panels have just been really, really helpful and valuable for me. I get the opportunity to meet all of you and get into good conversations. So thanks for spending the time with me today, and look for the panel highlight segments that come onto LinkedIn probably within the next week or so. And then certainly welcome you to share your highlight sections, just so that others that know you and trust your perspectives can take advantage of and hear about what you have to say. So with that, I'll let you go. With just a big thank you again, and look forward to staying in connection.
Thanks, Matt. And nice meeting you.
Thanks, Matt. Yep.
All
Nice
right.
to meet you
Thank
guys.
you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.